Hello. Are you fully equipped and do you have everything that you need to be able to effectively and efficiently weed your garden? So I'm going to show you the tools and the equipment that I use, not to reduce very tall weeds or brambles and things like that, but to do the fine weeding of little weeds that you find in amongst your beds, whether those are flower beds or vegetable beds. I'm Zorab and this is Byther Farm. I think one of the most important things is to have the inclination to do some weeding. I think there's nothing harder than coming out feeling like, ugh, I've got to weed. So I try and do a small amount of weeding at any one time, and I only ever weed when I'm really in the mood for it. And my first two tools are something to kneel on if I'm going to be working right down at ground level, and my gloves. Now, of course you can garden without using gloves. I prefer to use them, although maybe not ones that have got wet while they were sitting in my wheelbarrow. And the next thing that I like is to bring out two containers for putting my weeds in. One for putting stuff that's going to go onto the compost heap, and another one for pernicious weeds that I want to get rid of elsewhere. And then I start by taking out the most obvious weeds that I can see, the tallest and the biggest, and the ones that are in flower or going to seed. So like this rosebay willow herb, and anything that's in seed or in flower and is likely to then go to seed, I don't put those on my compost heap because I cold compost, which means that I just rely on a slow breakdown of all the materials and not a heated up pile that would kill off weed seeds. So I can't guarantee that these wouldn't all just reappear in my bed once I had put the compost back onto the beds. So let's just clear a few of these largest weeds. So I like to take the plants that I know are weeds first, and the ones that are very big and dominating the bed. I mean, hopefully you wouldn't leave them to get that big, but I do. Part of the reason I leave weeds for so long is not just because I can't be bothered, it's because actually I've got a really big garden, and so to work my way round all the beds just takes a bit of time. And I try and use my time weeding not to think about all the stuff that I need to do or stuff that's going on elsewhere, but to actually just look at what I'm doing, to listen to the sounds around me, to smell the plants, to smell the soil. So I suppose it's consciously and really intentionally just focusing on what I'm doing, but at the same time not stressing about it. Some of the physical tools I use are a hand trowel and a hand fork, very good for getting down under weed roots, levering them out. I also always bring with me some secateurs or some scissors. I tend to use these interchangeably in the garden, but they are for doing little jobs which, when I get to them, I realise I would need secateurs for. Things like cutting back this lavender. I cut back almost all the other lavenders in this bed, but I hadn't got to this one because it was so weedy and I wanted to get the weeds out first. Flowering plants are going off to the messy heap, and non-flowering plants going into my buckets to add to the compost heap. What I will do is take the top from the bottom like that to discourage it from growing back in the compost heap. Did you know we're also on Patreon? where in the cooler months of the year we hold a monthly patrons only live chat, and I share plans and news and behind the scenes stuff. And for most videos you'll get early access, so 24 hours before it's published on YouTube, and for that 24 hours they're advert free. Now if you've done the clearing weeding and you've just got little tiny seedlings to get rid of, you can use a hoe. Now this is the one that I like. It has a blade on 3 sides, but there are different types of hoes and different people like different hoes, and sometimes a different hoe for a different job. I prefer to hand weed and to go quite slowly so that I can make sure I get all the roots of things like stinging nettles, and also it gives me a chance to look at what's going on in the bed. And here I've just found part of a bulb of a Carmarthenshire, and I can see a couple more pieces there. Let's pop them back into the ground. There we go, that's nicely covered over now. But I think more important than any hand tool is a bit of knowledge, a bit of understanding what it is that you're looking at, and whether it's a young plant that you want to keep or yet more weeds that you don't. And that comes with practice and with learning. It's not something that you're going to necessarily acquire overnight. I came through this morning thinking I really ought to tidy this up before it gets too far into the season, because there are an awful lot of Angelica seedlings in here. And while I love Angelica, they do get really big, really stately, real show-off plants, and I love them for that, but I don't want a whole bed filled with them. So I thought I'll come through and weed, and while I'm here I'll just have a look to see what else there is. Well, I'm delighted to say I have found some Californian poppies, which I had planted, grown from seed, planted along here last year. I've got a big bunch of them in the pathway here, which I'm going to lift. There's a few more in the bed which I'm going to leave. The ones in the pathway I'm going to lift and move into this bed. The Angelica, well, I'm going to lift these, and to be honest, most of them I'm going to compost because there's just far more than I need. There's quite a lot of what looks like kind of grassy stuff. Well, it's not grassy stuff. This is salsify, but I'm going to remove it from the places where it's really going to get in the way. This self-seeds very readily, has very beautiful purple flowers, and then the seed heads look like giant dandelions. So I do really like them in the garden, but not everywhere. Salsify has got edible roots, so growing in the right place, not in the middle of the path, I really like having them around. Over the years, there's been many a time I have carefully nurtured a milk thistle growing in a pot, or planted one of these thinking that it was an oriental poppy, only to realise it's really quite a vicious thistle. I can now recognise these when they're really small, and as long as I spot them, they don't get to that size, or worse still, to this size. Generally, weeds can be thought of as a plant growing in the wrong place. So this is a self-heal, and I definitely don't want it growing in these beds, but I wouldn't mind it growing elsewhere in the food forest. So I'm going to be saving this, transplanting it. Some of the young plants I found growing in this bed include what I think is either a damson or a plum. Time will tell. I found several little rowan trees, which is great. I'm going to grow them on in the pot a tiny bit and then plant them out into the hedgerow. And this, which I'm very pleased about. So this is a cherry tree, and I have no way of knowing as yet whether it's an ornamental or an edible. But I bought 3 or 4 cherry trees, not even as tall as this, with me when we moved here, that I'd found in our last home. And I've planted those, and they are doing incredibly well. So it won't be many years before I find out what kind of cherry tree this is. One of the advantages of weeding by hand is that you get to know your growing medium, your soil or your compost really well. You get to understand the soil life in it, and you get to know the exact conditions in the various different parts of your garden. And that simply can't be learnt anywhere else. I feel like I've had enough of weeding today, and knowing when I've done enough is one of the things I talk about in my latest book, The Seasoned Gardener. It's a story of my vegetable garden throughout a whole year. It's a celebration of the seasons and of the harvests, and I wrote it to inspire you to enjoy your garden more, to get out there, grow the things you love to grow, and to enjoy all the amazing things that nature has to offer. You can order my book from my website, bytherfarm.com, on Amazon and other online retailers, and it's also available at all good bookstores.